Hey, dividend and income investors, welcome back to Dividend Stockpile, where we talk about all things dividend and income investing related. Wanted to talk to you quickly about some updates from my favorite ETF company, NEOS Funds. They had two announcements today, so I wanted to bring it to the community's attention. The first one has to do with an ETF that I was talking to the co-founder and portfolio manager of NEOS a couple weeks back on the channel. We talked about one of their newer funds that had just started at the time. They didn't have a current distribution because the fund just got started at the time, but now we have the first distribution, so I wanted to talk to you about that. And then second, there's another brand new ETF that they just launched this week, which is a high income ETF that I think you're all going to love. So I wanted to talk through the details of that. So if you're interested, please stay tuned. All right. So let's look at the ETF that we talked about a couple weeks ago with Troy. It's the NEOS Enhanced Income Select ETF. What that particular ETF does is invest in high yield bond ETFs and then does an options overlay strategy on the SPX index, which is the S&P 500 index. So you get income from both the high yield bonds as well as the options that are written on this particular fund. So again, that just started on September 30th. So when we talked to Troy previously, we didn't have the information on what the distribution was going to be. If you want to listen to the entire interview, I'm going to go ahead and put it in the pinned comment below, as well as put it on the card here on the screen for you to look at. All right, so scrolling down to on their website down to the distributions, let's talk about what this is going to look like for our investors. Again, this is their very first distribution that they announced, and it is a monthly distribution. As you see on 10/22, which is today, the day we're recording this, they just announced 0.0752 cents per share distribution for the month. So the current stock price of the ETF as of today is about $10.43. So if you take the 752 divided by 1043, you get about a 0.72% return for the month. That may not seem like a lot, but if you multiply that out each month, and if we assume that they're going to be able to get a yield around that each particular month going forward, that's going to give you a total annualized yield of 8.65%. So that's a pretty good deal for a bond-related ETF. And the reason for that is you get the yield that the high yield bond ETFs are going to be paying, but you're also going to do the options overlay that they're going to use to increase that yield. So 8.65% approximately, we don't know what the future is. That is a variable distribution, but that's a solid return for relatively safe investment when you're talking about high yield and investment grade securities. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk to you about is a brand new ETF that was just launched this week, and that is the NEOS Bitcoin High Income ETF, or BTCI. So anyone who is aware of Bitcoin and the Bitcoin ticker, BTC, you're going to recognize this particular fund for what it is. So BTCI is a brand new fund that was just launched on 10/17. It has about $1 million worth of assets. And the strategy, as you see here on the website, is to distribute monthly income generated from writing call options on Bitcoin futures ETFs. It's actively managed by NEOS, and it's going to implement a data-driven call option strategy. All right, so their investment objective, as you see here, is to generate high monthly income. So again, a lot of their ETFs, if not all their ETFs, are monthly payers, which is great. And they use both a underlying security plus the options overlay on top of it to get that high monthly income. They're also looking at potential for appreciation based on exposure to exchange-traded products that have direct exposure to Bitcoin. So this is a different class of investments than what some of their other ones are. So the high yield bonds, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ 100, and so on. This one is on Bitcoin. Now, there's a lot of information that we need to go through, but just briefly, I want to glance at it. The gross expense ratio as of right now is just shy of 1%. So that is a little bit higher than some of their other funds. But once we get into the details of this particular fund, you'll see why the expense ratio is higher, because it is an actively managed approach, and there's a lot more into this. It's a little bit more of a complex fund than some of their other ones. But if you're looking to get exposure to Bitcoin and Bitcoin futures, as well as get a high monthly income, this might be the right ETF for you to investigate. Okay, so let's go to their the details of the fund. the principal investment strategy of the fund, this is where it's really getting into the details, is it's going to invest in exchange traded Bitcoin ETPs primarily through a controlled foreign corporation. Okay, easy enough. The second thing they're going to do is obtain indirect Bitcoin exposure through ETFs that invest principally in Bitcoin futures contracts. Okay, so there's a couple different types of ETFs that you can invest in when it comes to Bitcoin. You can do spot Bitcoin ETFs as well as Bitcoin futures ETFs. And so what they've decided to do primarily is to focus on the Bitcoin futures ETFs. All right, and so in addition to that, what they're going to do is employing an option strategy that consists of selling put options and buying call options at the same strike price on one or more Bitcoin futures ETFs. All right, so a lot of times if you're into options, might do things like a cash secured put or a covered call. And what this particular fund is looking to do is what they call synthetic covered calls. So instead of owning the ETFs outright, they're going to buy a call option on a particular Bitcoin future ETF. And they're also going to sell a put option on the exact same, and so they're going to profit from the difference between the bought and the sold options. All right, and they're going to use this to provide high monthly income, again, primarily consisting of writing call options on Bitcoin futures ETFs. So again, a lot to look about. Definitely go through their prospectus, read through the fund to make sure it's what you want. But what I want to do next is to show what the current holdings are on the particular fund. Okay, so it might be a little hard to see, but here's the breakdown as of today of their holdings. So they have about 76% of their funds in T-bill, and the reason for that is because when they do the puts, they have to have cash on hand. They're also investing in an ETF for Bitcoins. It's called the Van Eck Bitcoin ETF, tickers HODL or HODL. About 25% of the funds are there. And then they have a series of calls and puts on the Bitcoin futures ETFs. So as of right now, they have calls and puts on BITO, which we'll talk about in a second. You can see they have calls and puts on different strike prices. And this is what the prospectus was talking about, is they're going to do calls and puts on the same date and on the same ETF at the same strike price, and they're going to profit the difference between the sold price and the bought price. Okay, so that's what they're looking at today. So let's look at HODL real quick, and that's the Bitcoin ETF. And so what this particular one invests in, as you see here, is Bitcoin. They have exposure to Bitcoin through the ETF, so you don't have to go out there and buy it through a digital wallet or anything like that. You can just buy the ETF and get exposure to Bitcoin. So they have about 25% of the fund as of right now in this particular Bitcoin ETF. And then they're also doing the calls and puts on BITO, which is the Bitcoin ETF. And it's going to invest in Bitcoin's futures and does not invest directly in Bitcoin. So it's really important to know. So you don't have exposure to the actual underlying Bitcoin, but you are investing or doing calls and puts on Bitcoin futures. So again, what the market expects Bitcoin to do in the future, up and down, not necessarily what the spot Bitcoin price is today. So that's what they're currently doing their trades on. So let's go back to those holdings again. Okay, excuse me, that's the wrong one. All right, here we go. Again, they're going to hold a little bit of the Bitcoin ETF. They're going to do the calls and puts, and that's how they generate all the income. So this one in particular just announced their distribution as well. So I'm going to go and scroll to that as well. All right, so they just declared today, and this particular ETF has a market price around $50, and they're going to distribute tomorrow a $1.12.53 per share for the month. So if you calculate that out based on the current share price, that's about a 2%, a little bit over 2% return for the month when it comes to the distribution. Now, we don't know if that's going to be what they can manage every single month, but if that does continue, that's quite a good return. You know, multiply just back in the napkin math, 2% a month is 24% a year. That's a fantastic return. But let's just say it's a little bit less than that. Let's say 10 to 15% a year. That's still a really good return, and it provides a high level of current income. Again, it's just speculation of what their future payouts are going to be. It is a variable distribution policy, and it all depends on what kind of contracts and what kind of pricing they can get on that synthetic covered call program and the Bitcoin futures returns over time. So I wanted to go ahead and spend a few minutes talking about those two great ETFs. As you see, NEOS is expanding their lineup. They have SPYI, QQQI, IWMI, which are equity-based ETFs with an options overlay. And then they have the new BTCI, Bitcoin High Income ETF. And they have a couple fixed income or bond exposure, CSHI, which is a 1 to 3 month T-bill, BNDI, which is more of your aggregate bond ETF, and the other one that we talked about that was relatively new, HYBI. So again, NEOS is a great company. The founders have been doing options for a very long time. They definitely know what they're doing. And you get that professional management of your investing and your options writing and so on. So it's a great overall package. I definitely recommend it. Just for full disclosure, I do own a few of these ETFs. I own SPYI, QQQI, and IWMI. And I've looked into some of the other ones, but in my part of my investing career, I'm not quite ready for bond-related ETFs. So I haven't invested in the other ones. And with Bitcoin just coming out recently, I'll have to consider whether I'm going to be adding that to my portfolio. Historically, I haven't had any Bitcoin exposure, but because you do have professional management, as well as the options overlay, this might be a good way to get exposure to the Bitcoin space and get some income, which is what my primary focus is, and I'm sure a lot of yours as well. All right, well, thank you for joining on this quick video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Definitely check out NEOS's funds at neosfunds.com. Check out the video I did with Troy a few weeks ago to fully understand all the background of how they operate. And I look forward to talking to you guys again in a next video coming soon. Thanks again, and remember, keep stockpiling those dividends.